The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Tony Palmeri. On this edition of Eye on Oshkosh, in the first half, we're going to be talking to one of the candidates seeking the position of Winnebago County Circuit Court Branch 2 judgeship. His name is Dan Bissett. He's one of our current court commissioners here in Winnebago County, and we'll be chatting with him about his candidacy. In the second half, we will be talking to a non-politician for a change. We'll be talking with our Oshkosh Area School District Superintendent Ron Heilman about some school issues. So in the first half, welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you here and to meet you. You've been court commissioner here for a number of years, yes. 6.5 years, 7 years, something like that. But unless people have been in small claims court or their initial appearance for bonding or what have you, they probably don't know who you are. So why don't you take a moment and tell folks who you are and why you're seeking the Circuit Court Branch 2 position.
Sure. My name's Dan Bissett. I'm graduated from Winnebago County High School, went to the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh to do my undergraduate work, and went to the University of Dayton School of Law in Dayton, Ohio, and returned here to Oshkosh after law school. I was in private practice for about 6.5 years, and before I became Circuit Court Commissioner, I did a wide variety of different law and legal related cases while in private practice. I've been Circuit Court Commissioner for the last approximately 6.5 years, as you indicated, where I handle everything from small claims to the bond hearings to traffic court to the civil commitment hearings, juvenile court hearings, probate hearings, a wide variety of different matters that come before me.
You're seeking a position that's currently held by Scott Wolt, who was appointed just a little over a year ago. He took the bench, I guess, in January of 2004, and this is February of 2005, so just a little over 13 months. What do you think that he's doing wrong that you can do better, or is it not a matter of better or worse, it's just something that you aspire to?
Well, I don't necessarily think he's doing anything wrong. I do think, based on my experience, the 6.5 years of judicial experience that I have and my wide range of experience in basically all areas of law, that I can do a better job ruling on cases and making those tough decisions that affect the lives of our citizens here in Winnebago County.
Okay.
And
Dan, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right.
Thank you.
And you did give us a piece of literature before the show here that you're giving to potential voters. And you do have a portion on it where you say, Bissett has pledged not to seek or accept public endorsements or monetary contributions from licensed practicing attorneys. Bissett's opponent gave over $1,500 to the governor prior to his appointment as judge, including a contribution after knowing the governor would be making a judicial appointment. Now, we asked Mr. Wolt about that when he was here on this show. Are you suggesting that he was trying to buy the seat?
I'm not suggesting that. I'm certainly not suggesting it's illegal or unethical for what he did. It's a matter of public record.
Well, then why put it on the literature?
Because I do think people were concerned about it. The Northwestern wrote some articles about it, and I've had a number of people, lawyers and non-lawyers, indicate to me that they felt there was some concern about the nature of his appointment, how he obtained that appointment.
So you do think it's inappropriate? Was it inappropriate for him to give that money, especially after he gave some money? You say here prior to his appointment as judge, including a contribution after knowing the governor will be making a judicial appointment. Do you think it was inappropriate for him to give money to the governor after knowing that the appointment would become open?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes.
And
it's not illegal or unethical, but I do think it.
You do think it was inappropriate?
Inappropriate. Yes.
Okay, and as you know, the justice system in Winnebago County has been in turmoil. What can a circuit court judge do to restore some confidence in the justice system?
Well, one of the reasons that I made it a pledge that I wasn't going to accept monetary contributions or public endorsements from attorneys was to try to really rise above, and it's legal and ethical for attorneys to make contributions and publicly endorse judicial candidates. But I felt that in the stage that we are in with coming off the Paulus scandal, that we needed to rise above that and really try to remove any appearance of improprieties that there might be due to contributions, endorsements. So I thought that was one way that I could try to restore some confidence in the system.
So are you also, are you not going to take endorsements from, say, police, or will you take endorsements from, you may not take their money, but will you take endorsements from attorneys?
I will not take a public endorsement, no.
What about from the police? Say that
I will from law enforcement, other public servants.
Okay.
I will.
But not from the attorneys?
Not from the attorneys.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that obviously we have been hearing a lot about over the last probably 3 years or so is courthouse security. Now, you have worked not so much in the courthouse because you actually work in the safety building, but you no doubt have some opinions on courthouse security. Do you think that the current courthouse security we have at the main courthouse building is secure, or do we need to increase security a little bit?
Well, my courtroom is in the safety building along with another courtroom. Judge Schmidt's courtroom is located there. The other courtrooms are located in the courthouse. And I do think that there are certain steps that we can improve upon to make the courthouse and the courtrooms more secure and safer. There are volatile cases that come before the courts, family law cases. I've had a number of juvenile cases where emotions are running very high in the courtroom. So those types of cases are a potential for some problems and some disturbances. And fortunately, we haven't had a serious one in our courtroom or in our courthouse, but I do think there are steps in recognizing that our courtroom is difficult to retrofit into what would be considered a very safe modern-day courthouse, but I think there are certain logical steps we can to improve that.
What would some of those be? What would you advocate?
Well, I've been using video conferencing in my courtroom. I'm the only courtroom in the county that uses video conferencing, and all of my bond hearings are now done by way of video conferencing. So the inmates are not transported into the courtroom for those hearings. So that's certainly one way of removing them from causing a disturbance within the courtroom. Okay. So I think that's a very good first step.
Okay.
One other thing back on the issue of the corruption in the county judicial system and so on. Bill Lennon and his assistant DA, Mr. Balskis, have announced that they're going to be studying abuses in the Paulus era. Do you think that kind of investigation should be going on right now?
I really can't ethically comment a lot about those types of ongoing investigations.
Okay.
I do hope that there is a thorough investigation of it, but I can't comment on the specifics.
That's fair. I'm looking at your literature again, and I noticed that in one part of it, you contrast yourself with your opponent, Mr. Wolt, and you say you've got over 6 years of judicial experience. He's got 1 year judicial experience. Now, so you're defining judicial experience as just him being a judge?
Yes.
So I think he's been an attorney for 17 years. That doesn't count as judicial experience?
No, that wouldn't be. He was not a judicial officer, and as a court commissioner, I am considered a judicial officer. So. Okay.
So you are essentially you're trying to suggest that he's not really qualified for this position, even though he's been on the bench for a year.
Well, I believe that I am more qualified because of the experience that I have that I bring to the table. So. I believe in looking at my qualifications versus his, I do have the more experience.
Sure.
So.
Go ahead. Okay.
You don't actually, I mean, you don't sentence people though.
Right.
Correct?
No.
And I guess that's where the distinction between judge and court commissioner comes in. I mean, do you think that you still, even with that distinction, have more experience than him?
I do, because my caseload, although I don't sentence people to prison, I do the bond hearings, I do the preliminary hearings in criminal matters, I do the traffic and ordinance courts. So I do have a wide range of experiences in the criminal and juvenile system, juvenile justice system. And so I do believe that I have that wide range of experience in handling cases.
This is a very wide open question, but have at it.
Sure.
What do you think are some of the biggest issues facing our judicial system today, inherent or otherwise, and what in God's name can we do to help solve them?
Well, one of the things that I'm advocating strongly for is a unified family court system where all the same types of cases involving a family or all the same cases involving a same family are brought before the same judge. And under the current system, if you have a divorce case going on and possibly a domestic abuse case or a restraining order, or any other type of case involving that family, those may be in front of two separate judges. And I think bringing them together in front of the same judge allows that judge to get to know that family better, their needs, also the protections of the public, and would save judicial resources because it would make the hearing shorter, being able to combine them. So that's one area. Another area that I've been greatly involved in is child abuse prevention. One study that I've read indicated that approximately 9 out of 10 of our incarcerated adults in the prison system in the United States were abused or neglected as children. So I certainly believe one of the ways we can reduce our prison population in the not so far out future is to reduce our abused and neglected children. And so I've been a big proponent of trying to reduce that. And as judge, I would take those cases, our CHIPS cases, Children in Need of Protection and Services cases, as one of the most important type of cases that I would hear. I would review those on a very regular basis to make sure that the parents are complying with what is expected of them for the return of the children to the home.
Just one other thing real quickly before I ask Tony to jump back in here is, we are seeing, and I cover the courts with my job, and one of the things that I have been seeing is younger and younger defendants coming in. And it is really disturbing, and a lot of these are serious crimes. What can we do about that?
Well, as I indicated, many of those kids were abused or neglected,
right.
and hopefully by reducing that population and getting to those kids earlier.
But how do we do that?
Well, I think we need a good partnership with mandatory reporters, getting teachers and the medical profession, daycare workers, to know their duties and responsibilities as mandatory reporters of child abuse and neglect. The last year I've spoken to about 25 different mandatory reporting groups, teachers, daycare workers, medical professionals, about their duties and responsibilities under the mandatory reporting law. So I really am actively involved in that aspect of it. And I think that's one way we can try to reduce that. We do have innovative programs. A teen court program has been very successful in our court, in our county, for first-time nonviolent young offenders. So, but I agree with you. We are seeing younger and younger children committing very serious offenses.
Your opponent has advocated, Judge Wolt has advocated the drug court.
Yes.
And what are your views on the drug court?
The principle of a drug court, I think, is a very solid principle. We do have a high incidence of our criminal defendants who are abusing or addicted to drugs and alcohol. 70 to 80% would be my estimate, and that's consistent with the national averages for those. I think my opponent's drug court policy is something that would need to be looked at from a taxpayer standpoint. It could be very significant burden on the taxpayers. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed. In theory, I think it's a great idea. I'm all for it. I'm all for monitoring offenders.
So are you suggesting, Dan, that if something might reduce crime and might produce more justice in the community, if it's too expensive for taxpayers, you might say we shouldn't go for it?
Well, we do have to weigh what the cost would be for the taxpayers versus what the reduction in the recidivism rate or what the reduction in the crime rate would be. So to throw a lot of money to help a little bit sometimes is not doesn't make sense. And I don't know, I haven't heard the exact numbers of what his plan would cost.
Right. What are your views on some of the expanded police powers that we've created over the years? I'm thinking specifically of things like the MEG unit, Metropolitan Enforcement Group.
Yes.
Empowered to do lots of rough stuff to get the bad guys, and lots of concerns about civil liberties violations, people having their doors bashed down, and I think we had one prominent case was in Neenah,
Yes.
where a family was essentially roughed up, if you will, and they turned out not to have anything to do with the crime. What are your feelings on a MEG unit?
Well, I am in favor of the MEG unit. It allows to a multi-jurisdictional aspect of enforcing drugs, and in this day and age, the mobility of our drug dealers and sellers is significant. So we do have to expand that to include multiple counties. So that philosophy portion of it, I agree with. I do, and I do sign a number of search warrants. I do make sure when I review them and sign them that there is enough from a legal standpoint and a factual standpoint to warrant that. So I have declined to sign some search warrants when I've been presented with them.
Do you think we need greater citizen oversight of these kinds of things?
Well, I do think that the various administrations, the city police departments, the county sheriff's departments, they do need to continue to keep an eye and continue to monitor them. And I think for the most part they've done a good job doing that. But I do think that is important for those types of units, that the administration doesn't just let them out on their own, but keeps a close eye on them. And I think for the most part ours has done a good job on that.
All right. Sure.
What are your thoughts on truth in sentencing?
I agree with the truth in sentencing for the most part. I think we've tinkered it to a certain degree, and I think we have to continue to tinker some of the specifics of truth in sentencing. But I think the principles behind it I agree with, and the extended supervision I think is such an important key, that what used to be called parole, but now in essence we call it extended supervision, is such an important aspect of that, and the close monitoring on that extended supervision once they're released.
Yeah. How did we ever come to change the name from parole or probation to extended supervision, when it's all, as you just said, and past judges have said, it's all really the same? I mean, are there any delineations between them at all?
I don't really know how the names got changed. I guess when they change laws sometimes, and there's a major overhaul as that was, they look for new terminology to it. But it's much the same as other than under parole, you were eligible to go before the parole board after a certain percentage, and then they could grant parole or not. Now it's a time in which you're going to be released, and then you're going to be on that.
Dan, it's so hard to get to know judges because there's so much you can't talk about.
Yes.
It may come before you. But maybe it would help some voters out there if you gave us an idea of look at the United States Supreme Court.
Yes.
Which of the judges on that court would meet Dan Bissett's judicial temperament? Are you a Clarence Thomas? Are you a Stephen Breyer? I mean, where
I would probably be somewhere between Clarence Thomas and Stephen Breyer. I think it's important, especially for circuit court judges, to not try to invent law and write law themselves. Our duty and our responsibility is to take the law as written and apply it to the facts that are presented before us in that particular case, and not to expand on it in any great way. Obviously, in every case, there's a lot of interpretation of not only the law, but also of the facts and weighing of credibility and those types of things. So I think in some respects, I like to be innovative in the sense that I look for ways we can improve the system and make the streets safer and make the system more productive and efficient.
Can judges be compassionate? Do you have to leave your passion at the door?
No.
Well, how does that fit into being a judge? You don't just read the law. Okay, this is what the law says, and now I apply it. How does your own human emotion fit in?
I find my emotion, my human emotion, fits in most cases involving juveniles cases. Since I've become a father, juvenile cases, abused and neglected kids, for instance, are very tough cases emotionally for me to handle. I realize I have to, and have to do what's best for the children, the best interest being the overriding paramount consideration in those types of cases. And I certainly strive to do that. But certainly I can be compassionate, and I try to be compassionate on the bench.
Okay.
Judge Wolt has recently been, and maybe you can't even comment on this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Judge Wolt has recently sentenced a Neenah woman to prison, and I don't know how to pronounce her name, Marika Kabke, I believe, and that's been getting a lot of press. For the viewing audience, basically what happened is she was driving one morning, kind of blew through a stop sign, had hints or traces of marijuana in her system. The child was not belted in the car. He died 3 days later, I believe, from severe head injuries. He sentenced her to 6 years in prison. And at the time of the sentencing, she was pregnant yet again. And he's been taking a lot of heat for sentencing her to prison, especially when she's pregnant. Now her husband is claiming that she's not getting any neonatal care or prenatal care. What are your thoughts on the sentence that he has handed down?
Unfortunately, I would not be able to talk about that, simply because
a very short answer to a long question.
A great lead-in, though.
It was a good question.
That's the one I had in mind, talking about compassion.
Yeah.
I mean, this woman is pregnant in jail. I mean, you know.
Not the first time that has ever happened at all, but
it may be a case that if I were to win, that I might end up hearing. So
well, let's talk in generalities. I mean, when a woman goes to jail or to prison, and she is pregnant, I mean, what kinds of accommodations are made for her to have care? Because I know that inmates get dental care and they get medical care. Surely women who are pregnant are getting some kind of medical care, are they not?
My understanding is, yes, they would receive reasonable medical care in the prison setting, as anyone would for a medical condition. I think that's pretty standard within the prison system.
Okay.
Dan, I am really concerned about civil rights and civil liberties in Winnebago County, and that's why I asked about the MEG unit. But another instance happened over the summer where we had an officer that was tragically, thankfully he wasn't hurt very badly, but he was shot. Okay. And then police went and did, it looked like, random searches of homes in the south side of Oshkosh. And there were a couple of search warrants and so on and so forth. But people were claiming that they had officers come into their home and they were afraid to say, no, don't take my gun or whatever. Now, I'm sure you followed that case.
I was involved in some of the aspects of the case.
Yeah, in signing bond orders or what have you.
Right.
But can you not comment on this either?
I can't comment a lot about the specifics of that case. I did hear the bond hearing for one of the people that was arrested, and I did, the district attorney's office requested a substantial cash bond on that particular case because they thought he was the shooter and they thought they were going to be able to charge him. But I did not. I ordered a significantly less bond on that case because it was too speculative for me to say that he was the shooter based on the information presented, and I don't believe he's been charged with that at this point. So,
but wouldn't you agree with me, Dan, that a situation like that, when taken in context of we had the Walter Pagel situation a few years before that, it looks like certain police abuses. Do we need some kind of wide-ranging investigation of the relationship of the police to the community in Winnebago County?
I don't know that I'm in a position to really comment as a judicial candidate on that particular question. Sorry, I apologize for that, but I really
because what I'm getting at is, if and by the way, I'm not being. We have outstanding police in Winnebago County. I'm not saying that we don't, but it just seems to me if the judges don't ask for oversight in this, I don't know where the call for it is going to come from.
We can ask in particular cases or rule in particular ways to try to make the point that things aren't being done in particular cases appropriately if they in fact they aren't based on what's presented. So in particular cases we can, but generally our powers aren't such that we can order specific mass investigations or general investigations.
Because some people feel that the judges are biased toward the prosecution and police forces. If you and that some people just feel that way. If you were a judge, you don't sense that you're biased toward any side.
I don't believe so. I think I try to listen to every case that comes in front of me independently and base my decisions on what is presented in that particular case, not one thing I've actually learned as a court commissioner is not to try to prejudge any case or to try to jump to conclusions about a particular case. And in small claims court, you hear all kinds of different stories, and it's easy sometimes to try to buy into the first story you hear. But I've really made it a practice and tried real hard to listen to everything before I try to reach any conclusions.
Absolutely. All right.
I want to go back to just for just a moment here to a question that I had asked earlier about, you know, making changes within our judicial system, and I want to touch back on that again because, you know, one of the things that we hear from citizens and even law enforcement people is that people are frustrated with the overall judicial system and the way it just seems to kind of, you know, you bring them in and you turn them back out and they're picked up again. Do you have any thoughts on, and I realize that you said that some of these cases, you know, a lot of them, the people have been abused as children and so forth, but that's not the case in all cases. Do you have any other thoughts on what we can do to stop this from happening over and over, recidivism?
I do. One of the things that we're seeing an increase in is bail jumping, people that are out on bond and committing offenses or violating their bond conditions. So one of the things that I am proposing is to review those people out on bond very regularly to try to ensure that they're not victimizing society and continuing to break the law. I also think that one thing that I am going to propose is that if a defendant is charged with a bail jumping, that new bail jumping would go back to the same judge that placed them out on bond. Okay. So again, there would be that continuity of those cases. Under the present system, that new bail jumping may go to a different judge. So I think, again, the more knowledge that judge can have about that particular person and their needs, the more educated decision they can make.
Okay.
Do you consider yourself to be the underdog in this race?
I really don't know.
You've got, I mean, your opponent, Curtis Law Firm, prominent law firm, appointed by Governor Doyle. He's sitting on the bench.
I've been real happy. I have a great committee that's been working real hard for me. Average citizens, hardworking citizens of Winnebago County, a number of different professions that they're in. I've gotten a lot of good feedback.
What kind of campaign are you going to run?
I'm hoping to run a real positive campaign based on my experience, based upon my commitment to the community, based upon some ideas that I have to improve the system. I think those things, that's the hallmark of my literature and my campaign is experience, my commitment to the community, and my ideas to improve the system.
Okay.
We're just about out of time, but why don't you take about 45 seconds or so and just look into camera 3 and tell folks why they should elect you to Court Branch 2 on Tuesday, April 5th.
I would hope that the citizens will consider voting for myself, Dan Bissett, on April 5th, based on my experience, my judicial experience as a court commissioner for 6.5 years, my experience in private practice, representing criminal matters, representing family court matters, representing kids that are abused and neglected in divorce actions, representing the mentally ill, representing the elderly. I think I have that broad range of experience in all types of cases to rule on those wide, diverse cases that come before a circuit court judge. I have a strong commitment to our community. I've been involved in various organizations, nonprofit organizations, the Boys and Girls Club Board of Directors, the Hope Center for the Prevention of Child Abuse, other primarily children-related agencies. I have some ideas to try to improve our court system, hold repeat offenders accountable, monitor folks that are continuing to violate the law, and also to the unified family court idea where all the same types, all the same cases involving the same family would go in front of the same judge. So I think based on my experience, my commitment to the community and my ideas, I am the best candidate for the election.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much for joining us. We're going to take a short 2-minute break. When we come back, we'll be joined by Oshkosh Area School Superintendent Dr. Ron Heilman. We'll be right back.
Don't forget to take the mic.
We just escaped.
I escaped.
I escaped.
By foot.
Run across the border.
I couldn't practice my religion.
I was put to work in forced labor camps.
If I stay in Cambodia, I would have been dead by now.
If you think differently, then you're an enemy.
If you know how to read and write, you're dead. You speak your mind, you're dead.
The only way to express what I wanted to do was to get out.
I got to the country when I was about 14 years old.
I was 20.
I was 24.
I came here with nothing. No money, no English.
America stood for freedom, it stands for freedom, and that's what all my generation, young generation, wanted to be there.
For the first time, I felt like I have a right to be on this earth.
Here, you can do whatever you want to do.
I love my life here. I feel at home.
I'm free to do what I want.
Freedom to me means my life.
How you doing?
Hi.
Hi.
Have a nice day.
You too.
Thanks.
If only child abuse were this easy to recognize. If you even suspect abuse, call 1-800-4-A-CHILD. All calls are anonymous and confidential. Trust your instincts.
Poor nutrition today will increase Sarah's chances of anemia, add to her healthcare costs, sick days, even stunt her ability to learn. And the thing is, Sarah's not even born yet. Get proper nutrition before it's too late. Call or visit WIC. WIC provides nutrition information, healthcare referrals, even food. Your child has you, and you have WIC.
Welcome back to the second half of Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here along with my co-host Tony Palmeri. We're very pleased to be joined in this half by a candidate, not a candidate finally for public office. That's all we've done for the last couple of months, it seems. Dr. Ron Heilman, the superintendent from the Oshkosh Area School District. Thanks so much for being here. This is the first for you on Eye on Oshkosh.
It is, and thanks for the invitation.
Sure, sure. We tried this a couple weeks ago, and schedules and everything got kind of confused, so we're glad you're here. One of the things that precipitated my inviting you here was Tony and I both, ironically enough, had been participants in a budget focus group that was held about a month ago as we taped this, which we're taping this on the, what is today, the 17th, I guess, of February. It was held about 3-4 weeks ago. And it was kind of an interesting process. I could try and explain it, but why don't you explain to folks what that was all about and you know, why you're getting citizen involvement, which I think is a wonderful thing.
We had looked at processes that different school districts of comparable size in the state had used to get public input. You know, we talk to people. I go out and I visit with different groups, whether they're PTO groups, whether they're groups of retired citizens, what have you. But we just wanted to create an opportunity where many times when we go and talk to specific groups, we're talking to folks that have very specific interests. If I'm talking to a PTO group, obviously they're going to be very for elementary schools, that sort of stuff. If I talk to a group of retired folks, they're going to have some concerns about taxes and what it's doing for the affordability of them staying in their homes. So we looked at a process where we could talk to people really about, number one, what they valued, and number two, how we're getting some feedback in terms of if you had to make some choices, what would those choices be, prioritizing some of those values. And we try to do that by mixing together different groups of stakeholders and trying to get folks, I think, in 6 different focus groups from about 9 different potential backgrounds.
Are all the results in?
The results are all in. We have those posted on our website.
Okay, well, what do we value?
Well, we got, as we expected when you get a mixed group in, we found that we got mixed results. In the area of neighborhood schools, versus maybe looking at doing something a little bit different. One of the things that came back was, and again, I'm speaking in generalities across 6 different groups. The general response there was consider maybe doing something different, and maybe doing the way that we configure schools, or in maybe the way that we moving boundaries, that sort of thing. We do know, and I brought some data with me that you may already have had that data being as part of the group, that we're going to watch and see some fluctuations in different schools, our elementary schools. We know that's going to feed in, and it already has really started to feed into our middle schools, and we already are charting how it's going to impact our high schools, with one of the high schools declining a little faster than the other, but both experiencing some decline before they bounce back up.
Now, in the session I was in, there was little support for something called a split grade configuration. What is a split grade configuration?
What is a split grade configuration? And because of the number of elementary schools and small elementary schools we have, occasionally I get to the point with, let's say, a third grade group that I get to about 35 children. Well, 35 maybe is way too many for one class, but with our target numbers, if I'm talking fourth or fifth graders, we try to be at about 25. So if I divided those in two and had a 17 and 18, that would be pretty low for those classes. So what we try to do is to try and get those as close to our target numbers in our non-SAGE schools, which is 22 in K through 3 and 25 in 4 and 5. We try and get them as close as possible, and sometimes that may mean I take a small group, let's say about 5 or 6 fourth graders, and blend them maybe with about 15 or so fifth graders. That does create challenges, and that's why sometimes they aren't very popular and why you didn't hear a lot of support. With the curriculum we expect elementary teachers to do today, it becomes next to near impossible, and becomes impossible, in my opinion, if those children are in that classroom for only 1 year. If they're in there for 2 years, it becomes possible, but it's still very difficult. But it becomes impossible if they're only there for 1 year.
Another thing that came up was the issue of whether we need a full-time principal in every building, especially at, I guess, at at all levels, K through 12.
Right.
What is your view? Do we need a full-time principal in every building?
Well, see, many of these issues, we dissected them, but you almost have to put them back together and discuss them in terms of what the larger challenges are. Because of the number of small elementary schools we have and trying to put an administrative presence there all day, what we've done is we've kind of taken what have been central office responsibilities and put those out to the sites. So I've got people serving as elementary principals that serve at an elementary school of maybe, say, 200 or fewer students, but then because of the workload we know that generates, we give them some additional responsibilities that would normally be done by a central office person. So if we now go back to shared principalships, and we still do have one of those in our elementary schools at Lakeside and Green Meadow. Those two schools share a principal. But if we go back to that model, then it means that I'll probably have to take some of what we have done with putting those job responsibilities out and taking those back in, and I did that at a time when I've also cut some staff there. So it's not impossible.
But it sounds like, especially if money wasn't an issue, it sounds like you'd like to have a principal in every school.
Let me tell you, when I talk to parents about that, many of the parents want
they do.
They want that person there. It's a sense of relief. Some of our small schools, you think of small schools as only being in rural areas, but we have some of our small schools right here in the inner part of the city. And given what the changing demographics of our community are, sometimes parents are concerned that they want that person that isn't necessarily tied to a classroom with children that can kind of look out for the general welfare of their children.
On that same subject, Dr. Heilman, it's when I went to Oshkosh West, we had a principal and we had a vice principal. Now, I understand that was years ago, and I won't say how long, but suffice it to say it was a while ago. And I certainly understand that times have changed and kids have changed. But it seems like we have a really overabundance of vice principals or deputy principals, whatever they're called these days, I don't know. Can you explain to folks why we need these different vice principals and what it is that they do?
You're right. From the time that you and I have been in school, things have changed significantly. One of the things that has changed is the number of, in the case of high schools, young adults that we're serving that with disabilities. Young people that in the past may not have been served by the public schools, they may have been served in public institutions. Those students that have special needs create a tremendous amount of not only paperwork but additional responsibility. Assistant principals serve in roles in something called IEP teams, or special groups, special teams that get together to discuss the educational plan for each of those students, and those are very, very individualized, and that again takes a ton of time. When you look, and I know when the public looks and thinks back, they think, boy, we do have a lot of administrators at our schools. When we look, nationwide, or we look, maybe even more locally in the Fox Valley area, again, we're staffed fairly lean there. We have as many assistant principals at Oshkosh West as Kimberly does, with 800 fewer students. So it does look like we do have a lot of folks, but trust me, they stay very, very busy.
Okay.
Dr. Heilman, I was watching the school board meeting the other night, and I believe your director of assessment, what's his name?
Phil Eichstead.
Eichstead was making the point that when you look at the demographics of our district and how they're correlated with test scores and so on, our district may be designated under No Child Left Behind as a problem district, or,
Right. A district identified for improvement or a school identified.
Isn't this something to be alarmed about?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we're trying to always stay one step ahead of that. For instance, we already know that we receive, I'd call a ding. We received a ding at Oshkosh North with our limited English proficient students. The thing that is just makes people and school administrators crazy and gives us gray hair a lot faster than it should come in is the fact that you can correct a problem at a school.
Yeah.
We can correct that problem at Oshkosh North. And then there are literally dozens, I think in the case of subgroups, about 40 subgroups that you can be hit at any given time at any given school if you have a large enough population. Our two high schools have a large enough population, we qualify in all those subgroups. If we correct in one area but a new area crops up and we get dinged in 2 consecutive years, all of a sudden I have a school identified for improvement, even if we've done something.
And then what happens? Once that designation comes, that comes from the feds, right?
That comes from the federal level.
Once we get that, then what?
Well, different things happen depending on whether you have Title I funds utilized at that school. At our high school levels, we don't. But if this happened, let's say, at one of our elementary schools where it's a Title I school, in year 1, what I have to do is that school is identified publicly as a school identified for improvement, and I have to provide busing at the cost of districts using Title I funds for those children at those schools, for any child or any parent who wants their child to go to another school, anywhere in the district.
What's your personal opinion on No Child Left Behind?
My personal opinion on No Child Left Behind is I think there are some great components. You know, I have for a long time been very troubled when we look at performance of students on averages, because averages, you can hide a lot of sins by looking at averages. I think it has made schools, school teachers, and school administrators and district administrators much more accountable. The problem I have is the punishment side of it and the prescription side of it, saying, now you shall have to do this. Because what it does is it takes what are already some very scarce resources and it funnels it into areas where I'm not so sure it's always going to give us the intended results.
And what's the reward for doing well?
Is not being designated that. There is no, you don't get like a reward, monetary reward for doing well.
No, there are no additional financial incentives coming from the feds for doing well under No Child Left Behind. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I still am a little bit alarmed, though. I mean, you said we are trying to head off some of these problems. What are we doing?
Well, we have a group of teachers within our district that we call curriculum support specialists. They are people that really have a deep and sound background and really knowing what instruction, what types of instruction is research-based, research-tested that works well for different developmental ages. And we have them working side by side with teachers. I don't use them in any way to evaluate. They're there to support the teachers at what they're doing. And we're working with different teachers in different subgroups. We hired this year, although I'm not sure I'll be able to sustain the funding for it, an individual that we called a Title IIIA support person, and that is to address the needs of our ESL learners. And as you are probably aware, we have a group of new immigrant children coming in and families coming in that is providing new challenges to the school district, because now we're working with young people from 3 years old all the way up to 18, 19 years old that have never been in a public educational setting in their life. And now they're in our schools, and we're addressing their needs, but it presents a whole new set of needs.
Sure.
Absolutely.
You know, I realize that tax increases and budget approval or disapproval is not within your purview as a superintendent. But we had gotten an email from someone, and by the way, I bet you're real glad you don't have to run for your position, right?
Well, I have a lot of people think I do, and keep me running, let me put it that way.
We'd gotten an email from someone concerning the tax rate increase from the school board. It said the board raised taxes 9.01% this year with your support. Do you believe that's a reasonable tax increase?
In 1 year, it probably does not look reasonable. What I would challenge that person to do is to take their tax bills out for the last 5 years, add them up and divide it by 5, and you would probably find that ours is the lowest increase averaged over 5 years. The 9% hit is a huge hit, and I mean for anybody to have to take on a tax bill. And while I can explain the reason why that happened, it doesn't make it any easier for people to come up with the dollars to pay it.
So are you saying that there were not tax increases in the other years? Because
no, there were tax increases.
Right.
There was one year that we actually collected $1 million less on the local levy within the last 5 years. We've had tax increases. The tax increases in the way school finance works in Wisconsin is sort of like Brad Kaufman describes it as a teeter-totter. What happens is as we receive more state funds, the amount that we collect locally goes down, and it stays in balance. It's all done by formula. When the state this last fiscal year reneged on their 2/3 commitment, it basically shifted the burden from the state property tax to local property taxes, and really shifted the burden to local school districts.
Now, as you know, there's all kinds of tax freeze politics going on.
Oh yes.
In Madison. Jim Doyle, the Democrat, has got his tax freeze plan. The Republicans were taping February 17th. They came out with a tax freeze plan today. Now, according to literature coming out of, I got to admit, it's from the Doyle folks, if the Republican freeze would go into effect, our district, Oshkosh area, would lose $2.5 million in fiscal year '06. In '07, we'd lose $5.2 million. So potentially $7.7 million lost. With Doyle's plan, we would actually gain $3.5 million because he's talking about fully funding the 2/3.
Right.
I mean, you had said about an earlier Republican plan that the proposed freeze could be catastrophic.
Right.
Because they're not talking about fully funding the 2/3, right?
Right.
What would define catastrophe for us? Like teacher layoffs? What would be the catastrophe? If we had to make up for $2 million, $2.5 million in fiscal year '06, what does that mean to the district?
What it means is to the district, what it means to students, and what it means to parents is we cannot continue to do business as we've done it before. I could not continue to operate the number of schools we operate if we lose that kind of money. It just becomes fiscally impossible.
But what would we have to lose?
Well, what we would have to look at is how we educate children, because I do have variability. I mean, one of the things I'd have to look at the detail is, in the legislative plan, do they continue to fund SAGE? If SAGE is cut, we probably would not be able, we could not fund that locally on our own. The other thing we look at is, again, we try and provide as much equity as you can within a system our size with the different size schools. We would have to become again, we would just have to do things in a very, very different way.
Now, even Doyle's plan is somewhat disingenuous because while he does provide the fully 2/3 funding, he provides it enough to get through the next election cycle.
Right.
There's no long-term financing of schools plan in Madison. Is that right?
Well, they only look in 2-year cycles. So no, anything beyond 2 years is not considered. I mean, I know that the governor put his select committee together to look at some options. Some of those I know to different legislative groups were just reprehensible. To talk about maybe spreading or expanding the sales tax, those sort of things is just was not acceptable to some
Which no one supports in Madison.
Right.
And I don't know if I support it, but at least it would be a more stable source of funding. Is that correct?
Well, in my opinion, it could potentially be a more stable source of funding, and it would let you look beyond a 2-year cycle, which we do right now.
Exactly. So as I look at, now again, you're not a politician, but as I look at what's going on in Madison, they seem less concerned about the children and their families and more concerned about getting through the election cycle. And I find that absolutely reprehensible.
Yeah.
And do these superintendents as a collective, all the superintendents statewide, don't you guys have any power to force this legislature to solve the problem?
Well, our PAC is not a very powerful one in terms of dollars and that sort of stuff.
And that's the bottom line, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately, it does become the bottom line. We do have very good communication through the School Administrators Alliance, which actually is a group of superintendents, different administrative groups, and also teacher groups that lobby for what we feel is very, very important information and legislation. I would say that they do a good job given the limited number of dollars. But the fact of the matter is, and I don't think this is maybe news to any of your viewers out there, the average state legislator really doesn't have a clue of how public school funding works. It's very complex, and so what they do is they run to get the printout like you have there to see what's the impact on the individual school districts in the areas that I represent.
You know, we have a DPI race going on right now, Superintendent of Public Schools.
Right.
What is the relationship of the state superintendent to the individual school districts? What relationship do you as a superintendent have with the with the state superintendent, in this case Burmaster?
Yeah. Well, Burmaster and her predecessor is somebody that, you know, speaks for all 426 school superintendents.
She does.
She speaks for all 426 school district superintendents, yes.
Okay.
She is somebody, Libby Burmaster is somebody that is very connected, I think, to public schools. Somebody that came out of the public school ranks, somebody that really has a deep understanding of all levels of schools, you know, from elementary. She's worked at elementary, middle, and high schools. And I think because of her willingness to be out throughout the state, visiting different parts of the state and visiting the schools in, you know, the schools that are maybe the haves as well as some of the have-nots, I think she has her thumb on the pulse.
Now, I know you're not going to touch this one, but, but her opponent, Mr. Underheim, says that she's a tool of the teachers union, a tool of WEAC. Have you sensed that Libby Burmaster is too pro-teacher and insensitive to every other part of the equation?
I've not sensed that, but, you know, I probably maybe look at the world a little differently than other people do.
Than other people. Yeah.
I want to talk about charter schools for just a moment. You know, some of the people in the community, Dr. Heilman, have kind of, you know, bashed the school district a little bit for having a type of charter school or a high school, if you will, in the Eagles Club because they serve alcohol there. Well, they're not serving alcohol to the students during the daytime school hours. Can you just address that a little bit? Because I've heard that from a number of people.
Right. And I've heard that really from day one when we looked at different sites. And we looked at many different sites for the two charters that are in that particular building. One of those journeys serves students in grades 7 through 12 in a project-based environment. The other one, Oshkosh East, really helps our most at-risk kids, the kids that really do have a very difficult time in a traditional school setting.
Sure.
When we looked at the different sites, you know, we did look at that, and I was very upfront with the board when we looked at that, and we were even considering that as a site. We've worked with the owners of that building so that with maybe the exception of 1 or 2 evenings when we have some programs there, usually related to Journey School, we don't even have kids there at the time that the bowling alley in the basement is open. We don't lease any of that area. The students, that's an off-limits area. We've taken some precautions to just to keep kids out of that area altogether. So that really, you know, if people are concerned about that, that really is a non-issue.
The kids are probably getting alcohol much easier in other ways than the Eagles.
I would like to tell you that none of our students ever, you know, address or even have to think about alcohol, but unfortunately that would be not the truth.
Right.
Ron, with all this talk about budget cutting, tax freezes, there's been a question raised about cutting into what's known as the encore curriculum. So we've got the core, what's the core curriculum and what's the encore curriculum?
Well, I'll tell you what the definition is now, but you can get many different definitions. The core that people normally think about is English language arts, math, science, and social studies as your core. Now,
and that should be untouchable.
Well, it becomes untouchable because of No Child Left Behind and because of state standards.
Right.
Now, but under No Child Left Behind, they also include foreign languages as a core. Many people don't know that. So they've expanded the definition of core. But I'm glad you asked that question because I do want to take the opportunity to set the record straight. We are not looking at cutting and removing opportunities from students. What we're looking at doing is, at the middle school level, we're asking the question, should we have required exploratory, which means a student experiences every one of those encore areas every year? Should that be a requirement in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade? What we're going to do next year with our restructuring is in 6th grade, we are phasing out the computer literacy course. And the reason why we're phasing that out is twofold. Number one, the students come to 6th grade with a tremendous amount of computer skills that 10 years ago did not have.
Wow.
Number two, we're integrating many of those concepts into the courses. So when a student goes into a 6th grade language arts course, and actually next year it'll be called literacy block because there'll be English and reading concepts going on side by side. They'll be doing things like preparing PowerPoint presentations, and they'll have those skills taught alongside, side by side. So
what else is involved in the so-called encore curriculum? Is that where you put your music art education and things like that?
That's where most of those things are. You know, it also includes industrial tech. It includes modern languages as it's defined right now, those sort of things, yes.
All right. Now, all of those are vital, are they not?
Absolutely.
And so, how does a district, when it has to, make a decision as to which one of those areas will go?
It's not a decision of what areas will go. It may be the number of sections that are offered, the variety, the richness of the number of opportunities you have. For instance, at our middle schools, because we have such a very rich musical program that starts with elementary strings and builds from there, we offer many different levels that children and young people can really tap into based on what their musical ability is. And what the budget crisis might do is cause us to go back and say we might have to consider limiting the number of different opportunities that we have. But again, we've not looked at eliminating. I think that was a concern of some of the young people that came out the last board meeting about, don't do away with art. Art is one thing that I really look forward to in the day. Let me assure them we're not looking at doing away with those things. What we're looking at, and I've had some parents come to me on just the opposite things, having some issues with their child maybe having an interest in choir and band, but they don't have those opportunities because that's two music encore areas. They have to experience other encore areas. So it's a matter of allowing children maybe by the time they get to 7th grade a little bit and by 8th grade a lot more, of making some very wise choices and really hooking it back to not only interests but career goals and what have you.
Okay.
We're almost out of time, but in the couple minutes that we have left, Doctor, other than the obvious, which is financing, the budget, other than that, what do you see as one or two of the biggest issues really facing this district in the next year or two?
In the next year or two, the one thing that when I go and I talk to groups, they hear me over and over talk about is the changing demographics of our community. Yeah. The number of children we have that are on the free and reduced lunch, which is our measure of poverty in the public schools, has increased dramatically.
Incredible.
It's sad. Let me tell you, as I spend time in schools, and I spend a ton of time this year at Oshkosh East and Journeys as kind of being like the principal there in addition to being the superintendent, we've got a tremendous our staff at that school and at all of our schools are doing a lot to try and reach out. I've got teachers there and others that have helped me that go to Festival Foods, and on Tuesday mornings they pick up a box of fruit that usually lasts for a couple of days. So we're trying to make sure our young people really have a good start in the morning, a good solid breakfast. That's a concern of mine. Beyond you asked short term, but if I can go long term, my long term concern also is, given the tight budget issues we have, how are we going to be able to provide top-rate facilities as we move into the future? And we do have good schools now, but again, the amount of investment that we need to put in those schools, and the article that the Northwestern talked about regarding the roofs, shows that we have demands on our budget. We have increased our budget. The Northwestern might not have thought that, but we're spending next year $837,000. We bumped it up by about doubled it since I've come to Oshkosh, the amount of dollars we're putting in to constant maintenance of our schools. But unfortunately, those maintenance lists sometimes are growing faster than we can keep up or put the dollars to them. So those are the short-term and the long-term challenges.
Okay, all right, good enough. Well, listen, it's been a fascinating half an hour, and I'd like to have you back sometime and talk more about problems facing the district and how we can solve them. So thank you very much for being here. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us. Thanks to Tony, and we'll see you next time. Until then, take good care and keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.